Since the remake or reimagining of Resident Evil 2 is headed our way soon, and or probably out depending on when this video goes up, I thought I would talk about my history with the game, how I discovered the series, and survival horror in general, leading to today. My very first run-in with the Resident Evil series was back in middle school. During the time we were doing SAT testing, the teachers had the TV going while we nourished ourselves on sugary breakfast snacks before testing started. I remember a commercial for something with the memorable name Nemesis in it and a very Terminator-esque setup where a woman was running away from a relentless pursuer that wouldn't go down easy even with heavy weaponry. Then there was the occasional bit about crowds of zombies and things in the city being on fire. Yes, that was Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, also called Biohazard 3 Last Escape in Japan. Zombie games and movies were slowly becoming a trend in the late 90s and early 2000s. But before Resident Evil, my only experience with zombies was the House of the Dead series in arcades, as I was an avid arcade goer and owned nothing more than an NES and a computer to play games at the time. Some of my friends whose parents allowed them to play horror games with gore despite being under the allowed age, which happened commonly back then and still happens today, despite ratings, would talk about survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and bring their guidebooks with them to school to show me pictures and then make art of the characters, since we like to share each other's art. Because I didn't have a PlayStation of my own, I was limited to playing previews of games at retail stores, back when they had screens lined up above the game cases and electronics departments. Some stores even had their own little hub built for newly released game systems and launch titles. I would also try out games whenever I'd go over the houses of others, but I was sort of restricted in that regard. However, one instance of visiting a house with a PlayStation and demo discs is me seeing the trailer for Resident Evil 2 for the first time. It was one of the discs that had a pretty decent demo of Final Fantasy VII on it, which I also played repeatedly. In the trailer, I found the zombie that was on fire before it grabbed you and the appearance of the alligator to be quite frightening. After that, I was so excited I kept talking to my friends about it despite the game having already been out along with RE3 and Code Veronica soon to follow. It'd be a while before I would even get a chance to try it out for myself. Until then, I had to make do with what I had and simply see if I could find anything online in the early days of the internet. I only had knowledge of NES and SNES emulators at the time, so even trying to locate a ROM or emulate it was not an option. Eventually, I was invited over a friend's house that I had become quite acquainted with and warmed up to the small group of gamers I was always seen attached to. She loved the Resident Evil games and played RE2 on the early version of the PS2. Not having much experience with the PS2, I didn't really question why she was able to play PS1 games on it. I was just happy to play any game she had that it could play. I was pulled on the later contents of the game without having played it yet, however I didn't care. I was too fascinated by Leon's interactions with Ada, the grotesque forms of William Birkin, and the skinless naked zombies wandering around in the labs. I even got a chance to play some of the lab sections. A horror game like that felt a little overwhelming at the time, especially since I wasn't used to the control scheme, but just a taste of it was enough to convince me to seek it out later when circumstances allowed it. Opportunities arrived when I got my first job at 16, and that same friend sold me an N64 and a copy of Ocarina of Time. It may have not been Resident Evil, but allowed me some time to get used to the system and develop my love for some other series I was familiar with. Since I was very restricted in what I could do and access outside of the home, the idea of going out and buying games with the money I was allowed to keep from my job never crossed my mind. I was just so used to buying and borrowing games from friends. But later, that would actually land me a copy of RE2 to play for myself. Well, temporarily. It was after I moved away from the town of my middle school and away from my old gamer friends, to a new state where I had to start all over again. It was now some ways into high school, and the first interaction I recall that led to new friends and game discussions was noticing someone playing Yu-Gi-Oh cards while waiting for class to start. I had a bit of an interest in them, and that led to talking about game systems and favorite series of games. I even mentioned that I had an N64. This particular friend lived nearby, so it allowed for the perfect chance to borrow games and share experiences. He had two games that he thought would fit my fancy, GoldenEye and Resident Evil 2. I had absolutely no idea that Resident Evil 2 was ported over to the N64. I was incredibly thankful for his offer, and he was very kind in allowing me much time to spend on these games before I returned them. Time is something I would definitely need, as a few years had passed since my last experience with Resident Evil 2, and it would show. For a short while I struggled with the tank control scheme while starting the game, and me playing with that chunky spaceship of a controller probably didn't help. But I was determined to get through the game, so I pushed through. I warmed up to tank controls and understood that there was a reason they were paired with fixed camera angles to create a unique horror experience. Later in my game collecting years, I would come across games that also made use of fixed camera to create a certain cinematic feel, along with pre-rendered environments, but paired with action control schemes that made various parts of those games very frustrating. In a slower paced game with an action control scheme, you can probably incorporate a fixed camera here and there, but overall it just doesn't work together as well as tank controls. And tank controls only work well, in my opinion, with classic-styled horror games. In RE2, there are specific parts of the RPD where the camera is focused more towards walls, like the hand suddenly coming out to grab you as you walk down a hall, or sections where Mr. X busts through, windows in rooms and halls where crows and lickers would break through. Even playing the game today, I still find myself getting spooked in those areas. In the realm of horror games, jump scares tend to be looked down upon today, but used in moderation, I think they can still work. Back to playing Resident Evil 2, I really took to what they coined as the Metroidvania style of layout and progression for the RPD in various areas later. Being a Metroid and Castlevania fan before this allowed me to get hooked right away. Having the additional scenario change based on who you played as first and certain items were affected by how you play added to the replay value of this style of game. The classic style Resident Evils also made use of unique puzzles that were even sprinkled throughout and not quite as cryptic as some of the puzzles in Silent Hill, but not so simple as to grab this item and place it in the thing some odd feet away from you, or beat this enemy to put the object in the door as some post-RE4 Resident Evils tended to do. These puzzles were balanced with combat and downtime in between sections where enemies would be. I feel in order to build tension between enemy confrontations, especially stronger enemies, that downtime is needed while exploring in order to sort of disarm the player and give them a false sense of security. The music in this game also helped to set the mood for different areas, a mix of calm and anxiety, that small sense of dread that nips in the back of your mind. I feel like RE2 did this very well. I was impressed with the characters and enemy designs in this game. All characters, even minor ones like Ben Bertolucci, were enjoyable with dialogue that fit the B-movie horror atmosphere. They didn't talk too much or overstay their welcome. The intentions of the characters like Brian Irons and Ada were much more subtle, so you were left in uncertainty whether you were getting yourself in a bad situation or not, not immediately knowing whether you can trust a person or if they'd suddenly lose their sanity and turn on you really adds to the horror atmosphere. With the enemies, it was a nice combination of human and animal-based enemies, much like Resident Evil 1. And then after a while, the zombies are more like fodder as you collect more powerful weapons, and meant as a hindrance while you were worrying more about the lickers, dogs, Mr. X busting through walls, or fights with the various forms of Birkin and other large enemies. I feel like the game does lose a sense of tension that the RPD has once you get towards the labs. But at this point you're pretty well loaded, unless you're doing a pistol or knife only run, so you're not as vulnerable as when you first started and the areas aren't quite as claustrophobic. Despite some minor complaints, I became obsessed with this game and played it multiple times to unlock everything I could. I remember coming across the Tofu Survivor mode without having previously known about it, and being so amused by it that I tried to discuss it with my friends, who had already played many of the Resident Evil games by this point. So I probably came off silly getting so excited over something that's been out for a while. I remember sometime after borrowing the N64 port of RE2, I came across something that was like a PC demo for the game, or a demo of a mod made for the PC port that allowed you to play as characters like Ben Bertolucci, Marvin, Hunk, and even Brad Vickers, in place of Leon or Claire. I don't remember if I spent too much time on it though. In the same year that remake of RE1 was released on GameCube, I remember looking up various things on Resident Evil and characters in RE2 on the internet when I came across screenshots teasing the early build of RE4, known as the Castle Fog or Hallucination version. Because of RE2, I had become attached to Leon, so I was very excited to see him again rendered in a more modern form. It is interesting how he became a sort of golden boy for the series, even still to this day with his representation in RE2 Remake, and how they might be cleaning the alcoholic side of his character up, which I don't necessarily agree with. I know that he wasn't as well received when he was introduced as a character, and between both early versions of Code Veronica and RE4, it seemed he was previously destined to die, and RE4 could have been the end of the series. Because of the turn the series took for a while after RE4, some veteran fans might have agreed that the series should have ended with 4. It's had a lot of bumps in the road to get to RE7 and the reimagining of RE2, and based on the sales of the HD remasters, a return to horror was greatly welcomed. Back to my personal history with the series, in the year that Resident Evil Rebirth came out, or the Resident Evil 1 remake on GameCube, I was visiting my younger brother and he had rented it from a Blockbuster that was very close by. Both my younger and older brothers were big fans of Capcom games and some of the other series I liked that had Metroidvania aspects, so they had an appreciation for the Resident Evil series. During a weekend, we sat in his room in the dark with a CRT TV and his GameCube sitting on the floor, and I remember watching that intro screen as the zombie in a body bag slowly rose up, followed by a sudden headshot. It was both a frightening experience and a beautifully crafted game. I have a lot of respect for the remake of Resident Evil 1, and especially with the HD remaster, I've yet to see a game in the series top that experience. However, I do think with RE7 and the upcoming Resident Evil 2 remake or reimagining, we're at least on the right track. It was both RE2 and RE1 remake that eventually spiraled me into a hobby of collecting all of the games in the series, and I haven't regretted it since. I do have a mix of hope and concerns for the remake of Resident Evil 2, and there's still some slight uncertainty where the series will go from here, but I hope the fans continue to provide feedback that can keep it going in the right direction if Capcom is determined to keep producing titles for the series. My only advice for them when it comes to Resident Evil is to not saturate the games with elements trying to please or pull in too many groups of people at once, because you'll end up creating a product that pleases no one. Thanks for listening to my little trip down memory lane. I hope the series continues to provide more wonderful experiences for me to reflect upon, and I hope it does the same to fellow Biohazard or Resident Evil fans as well.